Nous avons la chance de passer maintenant au moment des comparaisons internationales et nationales en matière de leadership. Et nous allons alterner les trois présentations des collègues qui sont là. Pour ma part, je voulais d'abord remercier Romuald de m'avoir invité. Donc, je suis Jean-Michel Coignard, inspecteur général de l'éducation, du sport et de la recherche, et dire tout l'intérêt qu'au nom de mon service d'inspection générale, je trouve à ce premier séminaire sur le sujet qui se passe en France, en Europe. Donc un grand merci pour cette action qui retient toute l'attention de l'inspection générale. Donc, pour ces comparaisons internationales et nationales, nous allons tout d'abord débuter avec Elisabeth Gunnufulsen, qui est professeure en Norvège, et qui nous fait un panorama de comparaison des organisations et du leadership dans le nord de l'Europe, y compris jusqu'à la zone arctique. Elle va le faire en anglais, et donc munissez-vous si vous en avez besoin de vos écouteurs. Eh bien, Elisabeth, c'est à vous, si vous voulez démarrer.
Yes, my name is Elisabeth Gunnufulsen, and I am from the University of Oslo. My responsibility at the university is primarily I'm responsible for the principal preparation program, and also I'm the leader of the master's degree in education leadership. I have experience as a teacher a long time ago, like in 16 years in the lower secondary school, and also I've been a principal and a school leader for about 10 years. And after a long time in school, I started thinking about being academic and researching what I had been experiencing. So that's my background. I also have experiences with using a kind of a survey for school leaders, which has been developed by, for example, Stefan Huber and a European team. So if you are interested, we can talk about it in the break. It's not a young survey, but it's a kind of a leadership prerequisites. So we use it for the coaching in the principal preparation program. So that was interesting to hear about. So I have planned for 20 minutes. I was quite nervous when the time is passing, but my presentation today is primarily about this book, Education and Democracy in the Nordic Countries. This book came alive with colleagues of mine. We are 12 researchers from all the 5 and now 6 countries up north. So the presentation from Northern Europe will be from the Nordic countries. We have added Greenland the latest couple of years, but this book has the 5 countries: Norway, Sweden, Denmark, Finland, and Iceland. And the book is half of the book has country reports, and the rest of the chapters are discussion chapters, trying to approach the different thematic areas that we found in the country reports. So I will first give you the conceptual and analytical, theoretical framework for the book and the discussions we have made in the book with all the 5 countries, and then I will give you some short stories, that means the country reports, with 1 page on each country, and then finally I will present very shortly findings from one of the chapters where we conducted a comparative analysis from Thales 2018 report. So this book is, I need to say that Leif Moos here is the prominent forerunner of the first Nordic editions, and we had a lot of editions where we have asked and discussed, is there a Nordic model? And the first one was Transnational Influences on Values and Practices in Nordic Educational Leadership. Is there a Nordic model? And 10 years after, the new lead group had the same kind of approach, where we asked, is there still a Nordic model? Researchers have called the period from Second World War to 1970 as the golden era of social democracy. The Nordic values were about the open economy, a welfare state that was supposed to and meant to redistribute the wealth to all citizens. A strong public trust and, again, the strong state. And these similarities were discussed through the differences between the Nordic countries and the US and the UK. There were some gaps in the Nordic model, and that was, for example, the inclusion of the Sami people in this period. And over the past few decades, globalization, migration, de-democratization, I add that, and the pandemic have placed the school and its stakeholders in a new situation globally, but also in the Nordic countries. And I call it with new expectations, but also with new demands. So we follow the question, is there still a Nordic model? The background for the book was positioned within research on Nordic educational leadership. Within this transnational education governance context, with especially focus on leadership and democracy. So we have followed the notion of democracy and pedagogical leadership, which this is a language issue. But what is pedagogical leadership? It's a very common word in the Nordic countries. And we have all these adjective leaderships like transactional leadership, like transformational leadership, but we have tried to get our head around the notion of leadership and pedagogical engagement in this book. Also, educational engagement and room to maneuver, the autonomy in everyday work. We also had, as a background, the understanding of governance tools such as accountability, monitoring and control, as often framed by several overlapping national and international education policy systems. So that's what followed us during our writing, collaboratively writing of the book. Also, power and influence was a part of our thinking when writing this book and trying to figure out, is there still something as a Nordic model in education leadership? And that is the concept of power as both a fundament of democratic transformation in Nordic education institution and as social relational construct in school leadership. Power hereby becomes a productive and present energy, and not only a negative. When we research, we ask the school leaders, not only the principals, what do you think about your power? And they say in all the Nordic countries, oh, I don't want to talk about power, as if it's something negative. So power hereby becomes this productive and present energy existing at and between all levels of society, like Foucault writes, and in all social relations, such as the local policy field in schools or between educational institutions and the state. So that's why it's important that power and influence is taken into consideration when investigating the Nordicness or the othernesses, like these countries here, in the field of school leadership and governing relations. I have written this book in Norwegian, and I brag about it because I'm especially interested in the micro policy making. It's from Mikael Lipsky and the notion of street level bureaucrats. Stephen Ball calls it the school leaders as micro policy makers or doing micro policy enactment. And this book, Innovation, is called Educational Leadership as a Micropolitical Praxis. It's about negotiation, and like Carl Weick, it's about sense-making, the meaning, the power, and the positioning inside the school organization and between the levels. So understanding school leadership as a micropolitical sense-making is about accepting that the school is a real arena for the use of power, persuasion, negotiation, and conflict. A lot of theories we use in a master's degree or the principal preparation program is about communication, of course. It's about dialogue, from Bakhtin, and sometimes it might be positive even to call it what it is. It is negotiation on how to understand these demands that we are put into. How do we want to do it in our organization? So school principals and middle leaders are shaping and enacting, and the leaders, like Jim Spillane says, the leaders who are taking and saying, you are the boss, you need to decide, but listen to me. So that is the enacting these local school policies. Not only central policies, but also how shall we do this here? So this is also the analytical framework that we got to put into the discussions in this book. So that was the first part. Now it's the 5 short stories of school leadership in the Nordic countries, and I'm going to read this very fast. In Denmark, it's quite similar to Norway, but in Denmark, and Leif, you need to correct me afterwards, but this is from 2023 though, and this is the country chapter. Central historical values is that education is free for all, and this is central for all the Nordic countries, with an emphasis on broad education and democratic Bildung. So the Bildung is quite central in the country chapter from Denmark. Increased focus on decentralization and the use of variations of accountability and standardization, thus increasing. We see it in all the Nordic countries. Governance boards have replaced former school committees, where the school committees have more the pedagogical approach. Now, the school principal is more like a civil servant reporting to these committees. School leaders are expected to act in a political, competitive reality through strategic management inspired by the private sector. And we also see this in Norway, with new even wording of how to talk about student learning. It's like a result, like you see in the economic areas. Research in Norway has shown that Norwegian school principals work under a loyalty dilemma, and we are comparing this, so that's why we see it also in the other Nordic countries, with increasing pressure to improve student outcomes, which does not always align with other pressing local priorities or the diverse need of students and student welfare. And we see that in Norway and in Denmark there are not many private schools, not many schools for children with other disabilities. They are all in the school. School principals have a large room to maneuver and to use professional discretion, which means opportunities to determine how policy initiatives should be dealt with in the school context. And we recently had this confirmed with a great evaluation, a 5-year evaluation of the current curriculum, where the school leaders report that we have a great room to maneuver, but we feel insecure on if we understand how to do the new curriculum, if you do it correctly. So the school principal's role is closely connected to social influence and relational bargaining, as well as strategy to promote social justice and student well-being. So this is up against, sometimes they say that is a tension between the school's academic results, what is actually measured and what counts. So they say what we count counts. School leadership in Finland. The Finnish, and now the Finnish education system is characterized by a high level of trust, no school inspections or standardized national tests. Quality is assured through practitioners' high qualifications, knowledge, expertise, commitment, and responsibility. As pedagogical leaders of the school, principal must have insights into teaching theory, and that is more than pedagogical. It's more like learning. It's about the theory of teaching. To understand and analyze the teaching principles included in the national curricular guidelines. The leadership hierarchy in the Finnish education system, and this is quite interesting, is rather flat, and it can be hard to distinguish a principal from teachers when you visit the schools. Well, how do they look actually? But Still, they are more like teachers, is the report from Finland in the country report. School leadership in Iceland. School leaders are rapidly changing complex and multi-level relations with various stakeholders within and outside the school, on both national and municipal levels. There is limited and fragmented support from the authorities. Both principals and middle managers are swamped by administrative tasks, and this is actually not only Iceland, but this is most prominent from the country report from Iceland and from the research in Iceland. Requirements for pedagogical leadership are not the leading demand. School leaders lack professional support and formal educational training. So Sweden is the country where we have found that private schools and the accountability aspects has been more to the front than the other 4 countries I report on. External expectations, support and control from national and local authorities have an increasing impact on the local schools. Contemporary change processes affect to a high extent principals' role and tasks in the local schools and create an increasing heterogeneity in prerequisites, expectations, and results. There is a strong will and a high ambition to improve schools for better results on all governance levels. Ambitions that often ask for fast effects, what works, which have backsides such as concurring reforms and high turnover among school leaders. Okay, so this is the very short the country reports, and behind this is about the accountability and the monitoring and the control and whether the school leaders report in research from these countries if they have to comply and conform. And something that we looked into, I will be very quickly on it, it's about national testing and the publicity of the results and the comparison and the benchmarking. We can see that Norway and Denmark, they are the only countries that have central and final exams actually after the 10th grade in Norway. I think it's 9th grade in Denmark, before upper secondary. In Finland, they do not have national tests or other mandatory standardized tests. That was 3 years ago. In primary schools, students only receive performance grades and they do not have any exams. I hope that still counts. We can have comments from those experts sitting back there. So, in Iceland, teachers' performance grades serve as the final assessment, no national exam. I chose this picture because this has something to do with how to measure, I would say, student performance and maybe also school success in some parts, not all. Another picture I thought would be interesting is formal requirements for school leaders. Similarities between all the 5 countries is demand on pedagogical background. The differences is how strictly leadership education is legislated. And Sweden and Finland, they have mandatory, like principal preparation, befattningsutbildning, within 4 years of appointment. And in Finland, it's mandatory certificate of educational administration. In Norway and maybe all the other countries, it's highly expected that you have principal preparation, and if you have it when you apply for a position, then you will win the position. But still, it's not easy to hire school principals in this country. It's not very popular to become a school principal. So this is a challenge. Very short, chapter 8. What shall we do with all this information and all these 5 country reports? We need to ask some questions. So this is from Talis 2018 and 2018 and the country reports. We ask the question, how can shared responsibility and pedagogical engagements be identified in the principal's role from a Nordic perspective? So according to Moose and colleagues, it's apparent that the government in the Nordic countries interpret and make use of global advice regarding the school purpose and leadership roles in different ways, while remaining to some degree Nordic. We can look at 2. I think these we have 2 kind of tables here. This is the responses of the statement. The school has a culture of shared responsibility for school issues. And you can see that the Nordic countries were at the average of OECD and TALIS and European Union, with Denmark quite high. But then, if you see, I make the important decisions on my own. This is about interpretation as well. If you are a principal answering to this question, I agree or I strongly agree. If the Norwegian 6.8% of the principals responds to I make the important decisions on my own. Is this about not having the professional discretion or not being a strong leader, or is it actually about distributed understanding of leadership? So this is we have been discussing this in the chapter, and it's in English. And also Sweden, quite low. But Iceland, we saw that Iceland they were pulling over on not having support, and they have 68%. They don't, as much as Norway and Sweden, make important decisions on their own. So the second one, the statement, I am satisfied with the support that I receive from the staff in this school. All the answers are, relative to the average. Norway and Denmark at the top with 95%, they are satisfied. So we can discuss the language issue of what is the staff? Is it all the employed teachers and assistants and administrative, or is it the administrative staff? This is something to discuss, but we can see I need more support from the authorities. Iceland is at the level of European Union and TALIS, 70% need more support, but don't Sweden and Norway and Denmark, 29.5%. And then again, this is the opposite. I cannot influence decisions that are important for my work. Those who answer that can influence, So it's a tricky one. So 40.6% of the Norwegian school leaders report that they agree that they cannot. So it's quite few, actually. It's also in Denmark, 17%. So what did we do with all this? We discussed it, and we wrote a final piece in the chapter. Nordic school principals seem to experience their practice with shared responsibilities, providing opportunities and educational engagement by acting as pedagogical leaders with a collective approach to the leadership role, even though there are differences in Nordic education policy context. Pedagogical leadership in a Nordic context means leadership tasks primarily related to curriculum, teaching activities, and the core values of schooling. And the values are really lifted high in the new curriculum in Norway, and Denmark is about to have a new curriculum, and I think they also would call it kind of the lifting of values. Yes. So power, trust, and control in the form of governance and leadership in the Nordic countries need more attention. So is there still a Nordic model? We don't know. Actually, to be quite frank. Yeah. The Nordic countries have many similarities despite the variations. Even if schools and leadership are similarly affected, the global trends are really heavy. That's why we do really not know, because the global trends, OECD, the falling of democracy, the very unstable political situation is interfering with schooling as we used to know it. Okay, thank you.
Merci pour ce tour d'horizon toujours trop rapide. On aurait 1000 questions et précisions à demander sur ces systèmes des pays du Nord. Vu d'ici, souvent, enfin vu de France, on a l'impression qu'il y a un modèle nordique et on est très frappé de la diversité que vous avez bien voulu nous montrer. Espérons que nous ayons quelques minutes encore tout à l'heure pour essayer de vous demander des précisions. D'autres comparaisons maintenant avec Caroline Letor, qui elle est professeure à l'Université de Sherbrooke, et qui s'est intéressé davantage à la comparaison des milieux scolaires. Est-ce que le PowerPoint fonctionne? Bah, vous voyez, du premier coup. On essaie de tenir en un quart d'heure, 2 fois un quart d'heure, si vous pouvez.
On va essayer. Je vais mettre mon timer.
Je surveille aussi.
Bonjour. Ça fonctionne. Ouais. J'avais compté 20 minutes tip-top, donc je vais essayer de réduire. Surtout, je vais vous parler de lenteur. On va tenter le coup. En parlant plus vite, en passant quelques diapos et en allant peut-être sur l'essentiel. Alors, je ne sais pas si je vais être dans la comparaison, mais c'est à partir d'une comparaison que je vais vous proposer peut-être un sujet, je ne sais pas si original, parce que ça va dans la ligne des travaux qui ont été discutés ce matin, en tout cas, j'espère. D'abord, bonjour à toutes et à tous. Et je vais remercier les organisateurs, les organisatrices de ce colloque d'amener un sujet qui me semble crucial aujourd'hui. En général, je m'intéresse dans mes travaux à la transformation des organisations. En quelques mots, comment des innovations se muent en apprentissage organisationnel, en regardant le travail collaboratif, la participation, le leadership et d'autres sujets dans une perspective systémique et en regardant parfois comme des dimensions cachées, les normes, ce qu'on ne voit pas directement, la culture, les affects. Je vais ici prendre l'occasion de répondre à ce titre du colloque, leadership éducatif, données et développement durable. Et donc je vous présente un travail exploratoire concernant le développement d'écoles, de milieux qu'on pourrait appeler résilients, robustes, soutenables, durables. Je vais me centrer sur une notion ici qui s'appelle la résonance. Mais on pourra voir comment on peut opérationnaliser ça dans des pratiques et les reconnaître. Alors, je ne me suis pas présentée. Caroline Letor, je suis professeure à l'Université de Sherbrooke. Vous verrez que mon accent ne colle pas avec l'origine québécoise. Parce que notamment, je suis belge d'origine. Et donc, j'ai un peu de système en tête. Je suis responsable du 3e cycle en gestion de l'éducation et de la formation au département du même nom. C'est-à-dire les gens, après un baccalauréat et une maîtrise, ils viennent faire un 3e cycle préparatoire, un doctorat professionnel. Ils sont des gestionnaires. Mes étudiants, ils ont entre 30 et la veille de la retraite, parfois, quand ils sont diplômés. Donc, on est vraiment dans l'apprentissage tout au long de la vie. Voilà, je vais faire ça en 4 points. J'ai essayé, oui. Après avoir vous posé le questionnement, je vous propose un cadre pour reconnaître, identifier, voire promouvoir un leadership favorable au développement de milieux résonnants. J'ai évité d'appeler leadership résonnant. J'aurais peut-être un bon business là à faire, mais j'ai déjà vu sur LinkedIn avec des images un peu ésotériques, des anges, etc. Le concept, on va essayer de le rapprocher plus d'une lecture scientifique. Tout le monde connaît... Ah oui, donc ça, c'est ma problématique. C'est de dire que, en fait, la question des bouleversements climatiques qui nous occupent, qu'on ne peut plus nier aujourd'hui, sont liées à la fois à des problématiques sociales et que ça, c'est un impensé en soi, surtout dans nos établissements scolaires. Ça approche quelque chose de plus lointain, alors que ces bouleversements nous occupent, traversent l'école au quotidien. On connaît tous les objectifs, je pense, de développement durable que s'est donné l'UNESCO, même si le mot développement durable parfois est critiqué parce qu'il comporte comme une contradiction entre développement et durable. Développement, c'est aller chercher les ressources, et on sait aujourd'hui, il suffit d'entendre les informations que les ressources sont limitées. Je pense aux millions de Libanais déplacés depuis 3 semaines pour ces ressources si précieuses. D'ailleurs, dans l'éducation, l'objectif 4, si vous le situez, dans ce cadre-là, les gestionnaires sont invités à questionner leurs pratiques, les pratiques éducatives qui soutiennent l'éducation au développement durable. dans cette perspective, l'école, elle est conçue comme un vecteur, un vecteur pour promouvoir un monde durable, ou société durable, si on préfère, mais comme si c'était entre nos mains, mais ça ne concerne pas. Il y a comme une distance, là. Ça passe par les écoles. Il y a énormément, une pléthore d'initiatives dans ce sens-là, dans tous les milieux, que ce soit l'école au dehors, que ce soit les potagers, le tri des poubelles. On y travaille, mais c'est souvent cantonné à certaines initiatives pour le monde vert, j'ai envie de dire, au cours de sciences ou en éducation physique, on va faire du vélo. Mais ça ne nous concerne pas directement. Or, quand moi je me promène dans les établissements scolaires, donc je me base ici sur des observations un peu en shadowing dans 3 centres de services scolaires. Centre de services scolaires, c'est un territoire administratif au Québec où il y a plusieurs écoles qui sont administrées. Cette problématique-là, elle concerne le quotidien de ces gestionnaires. J'ai envie de dire, le monde, ce n'est pas quelque chose d'extérieur. Le monde, il est dans l'école. Ce sont ces enfants qui les amènent, mais aussi les personnels de l'éducation, avec tous les défis que ça représente. Et ces défis ont été largement documentés ce matin, avec des questions notamment de... Messila Bissonnette en a fait part. Je pense aux travaux de France Gravel qui montrent un peu la fatigue, pour un euphémisme, des directions aujourd'hui, dans ce contexte à la fois, en plus, on va dire, axé sur la gestion, sur les résultats et à la recherche de performances des établissements scolaires. Alors, je ne sais pas si je vais les citer, mais on peut dire, dans les écoles, quand on s'y promène, les questions des inégalités sociales, de nouvelles poches ou nouvelles formes de pauvreté. Il y a des mutations professionnelles, qui fait notamment ressurgir d'autres questions comme le bien-être, ou Bénédicte Gendron nous a parlé de bienvivance, mais aussi des choses positives, l'apprentissage tout au long de la vie. Il y a aussi des phénomènes de radicalisation, d'isolement, de violence qui s'amènent, des problèmes d'eau. Au Québec, il y a certaines écoles, il a fallu faire bouillir l'eau à un moment donné. Donc voilà, ces cas-là, ça fait partie, on va dire, des problématiques que gèrent au quotidien les directions et les équipes éducatives. Mais dans mon sentiment, donc là c'est de l'intuition, c'est une problématique que je pose, elles sont gérées cas par cas, séparément, sans lien avec une problématique plus importante ou plus générale. Elles ne sont pas gérées de manière systémique ou conçues de manière systémique en lien avec ces bouleversements socio-climatique. Un petit exemple rapide, la grosse louche, guerre, immigration, et dans nos écoles, des classes d'ASPA, des classes tremplin, des classes multilingues, immigration des élèves, mais aussi immigration au niveau des personnels, avec des cultures d'enseignement différentes. Alors mon questionnement, c'est comment concevoir le leadership pris dans sa vision distribuée, donc ce n'est pas seulement sur la direction, mais avec l'équipe, avec les élèves, avec les artefacts et les routines, pour rendre compte des activités qui soutiennent une société durable, société dans l'école et dans ses environs. C'est pour ça que je parle de milieu éducatif. Dans le travail réel, pas seulement dans la prescription, dans un contexte de gestion axée sur les résultats, et en connaissant toutes ces limites qui ont été notamment émises hier par, je ne connais plus son prénom, Mélissa Heron, qui en a parlé. Mélanie. J'étais pas loin. Voilà. Donc, par rapport à ce questionnement, il y a plusieurs propositions qui sont faites par plusieurs auteurs, des philosophes, des sociologues, des économistes. Tout à l'heure, Bénédicte disait... Désolée, je suis économiste. Et par exemple, la proposition de Éloi, confiance et coopération, qui revoit un petit peu, ça paraît ésotérique, mais l'amour comme monnaie d'échange dans les organisations. Et ce matin, Christopher D. demandait est-ce qu'on aime nos élèves. La robustesse d'Olivier Amand, qui a été récemment nommé docteur honoris causa à Louvain notamment. peut aller chercher les travaux de Latour autour de l'éthique, de la nature de la science, où atterrir et comment atterrir, et d'autres auteurs. Moi, je me centrerai aujourd'hui sur l'un d'eux. Mon but, c'est de les parcourir et peut-être en faire une synthèse à un moment donné. Ce qu'on peut remarquer de commun chez eux, c'est ils considèrent le contexte comme contexte d'incertitude et dans une approche de la complexité. Ils remettent en cause la culture de la performance versus résonance, performance versus robustesse, et ils encouragent à apprendre à adopter une perspective systémique, collaborative, réseau, pour manœuvrer dans ces contextes. Alors, je vais commencer par Rosa, donc je m'arrêterai aujourd'hui ici. Ce sociologue, philosophe, nous explique que dans notre modernité tardive, on est dans un mouvement d'accélération qui caractérise cette époque. Et pour faire le résumé du bouquin, c'est genre, plus on a des technologies pour gagner du temps, moins on a de temps. Plus on est dans cette accélération, superposition, imbrication de temporalité. Cette modernité est aussi, dans son bouquin, rendre le monde indisponible ou disponible. Dans cette modernité est caractérisée aussi à un sentiment que tout est disponible, tout est là. Et on est dans une sorte d'accumulation qu'on va retrouver aussi dans les comportements, par exemple, des étudiants. On va tenter d'avoir toutes les options, de faire des co-diplomations, d'avoir toutes les compétences possibles, parce que si jamais, on veut avoir les options à portée de main. En même temps, le sentiment que le monde se dérobe et qu'on ne maîtrise pas nos vies. Et par rapport à ce processus, ce qu'il nous propose n'est pas tant de ralentir, ni de décélérer, ni de la décroissance, mais de la résonance. Alors, je vais essayer d'expliquer ce qu'il entend par là. C'est une relation, d'abord. C'est une mise en relation, c'est une interaction qui incorpore une dimension cognitive, rationnelle, la tête, hat, l'affectif, heart, et aussi corporelle. Un rapport au monde dans lequel le sujet, qui peut être aussi un sujet collectif, pas seulement individuel, est touché par ce qu'il vit et d'autre part répond à ce qu'il vit. Donc il y a vraiment une interaction entre le sujet et ce qui l'entoure et le milieu dans lequel il vit, travaille, on pourrait dire mon milieu scolaire. À l'opposé, ce n'est pas une relation négative ou douloureuse. À l'opposé, il met une relation muette, plate, on dirait en québécois, c'est plat. Une relation de résonance peut bousculer, peut nous heurter. Un conflit socio-cognitif, ça vient nous chercher. C'est ça qu'il essaie de nous mettre. Mais on est porté par ce sentiment-là, on n'a pas l'impression d'être jeté. On peut faire des liens avec la question de l'émancipation notamment. Donc il y a 4 mouvements. J'ai essayé de les repérer parce que souvent, dans les conversations, ça résonne en moi. C'est pas tout à fait ça. Il y a quelque chose. Alors peut-être ça résonne en moi, c'est peut-être le 4e mouvement, le 4e moment. Mais ce qu'il met en évidence, c'est qu'il y a d'abord un premier moment où là, le sujet est touché, donc il y a une ouverture, on en a parlé beaucoup de cette ouverture dans les questions de leadership, un moment d'affectation, où on se sent touché, atteint, animé par quelque chose extérieur à soi, un moment d'efficacité personnelle ou collective, je ne mets pas seulement dans l'individu, c'est-à-dire où on agit sur le monde. Et dans cette interaction, il y a à la fois, 3e moment, une transformation du monde et de soi. Et puis, il y a ce sentiment d'expérience singulière qu'on ne peut pas prévoir, ni planifier, ni contrôler. Mais on peut peut-être mettre des conditions pour, notamment, peut-être ralentir. Voilà, donc il distingue aussi ce que ça n'est pas. Ce n'est pas un écho, donc ce n'est pas seulement se réaffirmer dans ces dans ce qu'on entend, on peut être bousculé. Ce n'est pas non plus bisounours ou licorne, on n'est pas dans les nuages. Ça peut être heurtant, ça peut venir nous chercher, ça peut saisir la contradiction, la négociation, voire le conflit. Ce n'est pas non plus ésotérique, ça peut s'évaluer, se mesurer, s'observer. Ce qui est intéressant, je sais pas le temps qui m'a... Je suis là, 14. Je suis arrivée vite, mais je vais le passer. C'est qu'il propose aussi une conception des apprentissages qui n'exclut pas d'autres perspectives de l'apprentissage, mais qui les inclut, les imbrique. Performance sur des savoirs, compétences, d'agir compétent, et résonance, c'est là où il y a le moment de transformation dans ces apprentissages. Et je pense que tous et toutes ici avons vécu des moments particuliers qui nous ont donné, qui nous ont éclairés dans nos transformations existentielles. Moi, ce que j'ai essayé de faire, c'est de ce langage un peu philosophique et abstrait, et c'est à partir de créer un cadre qui permette de le distinguer et pour opérer des pratiques qui permettraient de distinguer des orientations plus orientées sur la performance et des orientations ou des pratiques axées sur plutôt la résonance. Alors, dans la vie courante, on est sur les deux plans, mais comment, à un certain moment, on peut faire la distinction et notamment pouvoir les identifier, les décrire, les observer, voire les mesurer ou les évaluer. Sur la posture, donc une posture dans l'axe où la culture performance, et c'est parfois ce qu'on amène les directions à faire dans le New Management, c'est prendre de la distance, regarder les chiffres à froid, sortir du cadre et sortir de l'émotion. De l'autre sens, on est plutôt à l'intérieur du système et on est pris par, on fait partie du système, on ne garde pas cette distance. Vous voyez bien que là, comme direction, par exemple, on joue sur les deux tableaux, on rentre et on sort du système. Une première approche est plutôt rationnelle, instrumentale. La deuxième est plutôt multidimensionnelle. Les apprentissages, j'en ai parlé, et des rapports au monde qui est différent. Plutôt en première, on cherche l'acquisition, l'exploration, l'exploitation. Dans l'autre, on cherche plutôt la transformation du monde. D'un côté, c'est la maîtrise, le contrôle qui est valorisé, alors que dans résonance, on est plutôt dans l'ouverture et l'acceptation d'une certaine complexité et incertitude. Je vais vite sur mes comparaisons parce que mon temps est clôturé là. L'idée, c'était d'aller... Donc, je travaille beaucoup par recherche-action participative, c'est-à-dire que j'accompagne des centres de services scolaires, c'est des conventions que l'on a avec elles, et on travaille sur 3 centres de services scolaires sur la définition de leur propre leadership, c'est-à-dire de définir un peu comment ils accompagnent leurs équipes éducatives, mais notamment, c'était après la Covid, donc comment ils ont fait pendant la Covid pour accompagner leurs équipes éducatives, le modéliser, notamment pour y réfléchir, à améliorer, mais aussi peut-être pour former d'autres directions entrantes. Donc, c'est une analyse secondaire de ce matériel-là. 3 centres de services scolaires, il y en a à Montréal, il y en a dans une province périphérique à Montréal et une qui est davantage éloignée sur la côte nord, à 700 km. On va dire ça comme ça. Et ça a des séances pendant au moins 2 ans avec des séances qu'on appelle de communautés de pratique où les directions réfléchissent ensemble. Tout a été enregistré. On a pris des productions. On a fait à l'intérieur de ces séances, par exemple, de l'instruction SOSI ou de l'analyse des pratiques. Et c'est tout ce matériel-là qu'on a travaillé. Alors, entre le moment où on a annoncé ce séminaire et aujourd'hui, j'étais fort ambitieuse de penser que j'allais arriver à tout analyser. Mais sur une partie de ce matériel qui est en gras ici, je résume là. Si je prends les couleurs là, bleu, c'est plutôt résonance et orange, plus performance. On voit des 2 couleurs dans les 3. J'ai rassemblé les choses, je n'ai pas fait la comparaison pour aujourd'hui. Je pense que mes données ne sont pas assez précises pour le faire. Ça mériterait de le travailler, notamment parce qu'il y a des cultures différentes dans les 3 centres de services scolaires, dont un qui est fort orienté sur la performance. mais on voit que les deux dimensions y sont. On voit surtout qu'on l'on peut distinguer, enfin que le concept ou permet d'une certaine manière de travailler avec une certaine précision et distinction différentes postures et pratiques qui sont travaillées dans les établissements scolaires sur les différentes dimensions. Donc ce que nous essayons là, c'est un peu de valider la pertinence heuristique de ce concept. Voilà, après ça, j'en ai fait une proposition de modélisation que je ne parcourrai pas en détail ici, mais que je vous laisse voir de manière à pouvoir avancer dans de nouvelles recherches. Et donc, mon prochain programme de recherche, c'est de créer une sorte de consortium avec des centres de services scolaires pour tester et développer ce type de leadership. En tout cas, plutôt voir comment, parce que ça c'est une prémisse, comment les directions aujourd'hui, sans en avoir tout à fait conscience, développent ce type de leadership. Souvent, c'est une phrase de l'instruction SOSI, les personnes développent tout un ensemble d'activités qui y contribuent, et puis ils vous disent « et après, je suis rentrée dans mon bureau et j'ai pu commencer à travailler », comme si ça ne faisait pas partie du travail. Voilà, ça c'est un peu mon ambition pour les 6 années qui viennent. Merci beaucoup. Un petit bouquin.
Merci, merci d'avoir accéléré la fin de la présentation, même si nous restons sur notre fin. Vous avez tous photographié le livre, ça y est? Merci, on est un peu juste, mais personne ne nous en voudra de vous laisser le temps, Monica, de votre présentation, à nouveau une vingtaine de minutes. Donc moi, j'ai pas très bien compris en lisant si vous étiez totalement italienne, en partie londonienne. Enfin, vous êtes très internationale, visiblement. Peut-être nous préciser où vous travaillez, principalement en ce moment.
Ok. Bonjour, je vais justement vous dire 2 mots en français, mais ensuite je vais parler en anglais. Excusez-moi, mais je suis plus confortable en anglais. Donc j'ai beaucoup d'identités. I have multiple identities. So I have worked in comparative education for many years at the University of Torino, and I'm working at the Institute of Education, UCL, in educational leadership. I'm Romanian at origins and Italian by adoption, and so I have accumulated a lot of country contexts in my life, personal and as well as professional. So I think, je pense c'est clair. Donc, oui. I'm very thankful to Romuald Normand et l'Université de Strasbourg et les collègues français for inviting me here, and I would like to talk about something that maybe we have in common across this context that I have mentioned, which can be related to low school autonomy systems. If I'm thinking at Romania, Italy, France, and the Ivory Coast, just to have a view on an African country context. But just very briefly, just to say I don't have all the answers. I'm not sure if I will say anything valuable as a takeaway beyond the understanding of differences at the same time and commonalities across systems. I'm focusing on convergences, and I cannot account for the huge diversities that we have between these 4 country contexts and school systems in particular. I would like to make sense of the struggle of the school principals in a context-sensitive way. I'm teaching at the IOE cohorts of international students, some of them coming from China, from all around the world. I think we have to adapt our theories to our audiences. And so also, given my background in comparative education, I'm very much interested in conceptualizing context in educational leadership. So a context within countries, across countries, and also I'm thinking that the school system is the first context to be taken into account when we think in terms of leadership. So very briefly, just to state what are the big differences, because maybe the presentation is a little bit theoretically oriented, and I'm sorry for that, but I think we all know that maybe in France, in Italy, and in this country context I mentioned, it is very difficult for a school principal to ask teachers to engage in professional development activities, because their teaching time and their working time coincides, right? So sometimes it's seen as a voluntary act, as an act of goodwill to stay at school, and to engage in something like that. Recruitment is not within the powers of a school leader, and the perception of autonomy, but also the institutionalized autonomy of teachers' autonomy are kind of high. And so how can these school leaders work with teachers in their schools? I think it's a very important practical problem. And how those models of leadership that we've learned about are applicable to this context. Of course, they make sense. There are practices that are very similar. Still, the struggles might be of a different flavor. The barriers might be more important. People acting with agency, not with autonomy, as Chris was reminding us today, people acting with their agency have to really invent solutions that go beyond what might be expected when we work in an organization where we can do many things. We are allowed to do more things. We can play with the organization in a more in a way that's more suitable to the role of being leading an organization. So finding time might be difficult, I think, in a low autonomy school system. Yes, so my perspectives are influenced by public management theories, and in particular by a Danish author, Tornving. And I am trying to deal with interactive practices of leadership. I am happy to be in line with the keynote on the first day, in a way. So I'm very much looking at how people interact, teachers and leaders. Yes, I've just moved back to show the title. Thank you so much. And so, some things to consider here: that formal authority and low principalship powers are insufficient in hierarchical and loosely coupled systems. The broader system governance is a primary contextual layer, often overlooked, whose influence is quite different in diverse school autonomy and accountability regimes. So how systems are shaped have a big influence on how actors might act, how school principals can act within their schools. I would also say that maybe leadership is also an organizational quality. It's not just related to people. It might be distributed across teachers, middle leaders, and school principals, but at the same time, it's an organizational quality that might be difficult to be identified when we have low autonomy on paper organizations. Various governance features such as low decisional power at the school level, high teachers' autonomy, and reduced functioning budgets impose tight restrictions on principals' actions. The method in my paper, published in a journal, draws on a comparison of structures and on the convergent governance modes. It's not on the divergent. I can write a different paper just looking into differences between these countries, but I'm very much interested in how things are converging. And it is based on a more descriptive report prepared for the global monitoring report, Global Education Monitoring Report team a year ago. So I try to make sense of those data from a theoretical perspective, showing how governance mechanisms, networks, hierarchies, markets, characterizing school systems, combinations of these governance mechanisms, characterize school systems and influence leadership values, attitudes, behaviors, knowledge, capacities, self-direction, and collaboration. I have also experience with the English school system, and I have produced a research review on the successful school leadership in England that Chris Day just mentioned today. So lessons from 2 decades of research about successful school leadership in England, a humanistic approach, it is what you have heard today, a passion for equity of principles in that country context with my colleague Chingu and with Chris Day. But we also have worked across that system with the concept of positive disruption. And so I have knowledge about what happens in high autonomy school systems, high accountability. We can also characterize these 4 school systems as high autonomy, but sometimes low autonomy, but sometimes moderate accountability or high accountability or very low accountability. We can also control on teachers' work and principals' work in different countries might not be usually that low, or even the level of the school autonomy might be moderate, maybe in low to moderate. In the Romanian case, for instance, where there has been a school reform recently, the same as in Italy, even if not fully successful. And the systems remain traditionally centralized in their DNA. So what I'm trying to say is that working across diverse school systems, it becomes more visible to me the difference and the difficulty to apply certain theories without considering the context. So the key question is, how do principals navigate decision-making in their interactions with the external and the internal context? And I think the low autonomy school system is a sociological tool in this sense for me. It's a specific typology at the heart of an important dilemma in the field of educational leadership around practices, behaviors, and tactics that are specifically adopted to overcome specific systemic barriers. And this is also in line with a growing body of scholarship focused on context in educational leadership. And I consider that broader governance is a primary contextual layer rather than societal aspects, for instance, the Nordic model or other values that these countries might share or might be very different. In this case, for me, the context is the type of the school system. So in the context of interactive forms of governance in education following Torfing, principals serve as pivotal figures engaging in micro-political leadership actions and strategies, negotiating power with relevant stakeholders within and outside the school, and are essential to the decision-making processes. Performing all sorts of symbolic, responsive, and discretionary roles depending on context, in addition to preferences and inclinations that are pertaining to agency. In turn, the environment is influenced by the social actors' interpretation and actual behaviors, which reinforce the existing structures. So, for instance, 2 quotes from French principles. Yes, ultimately we are loyally enacting what the government is asking of us. There are many points on which we are totally loyal. We apply the text and decrees, and here we are administrators. We are administrators. And a second quote, based on this policy text, there are measures and derogations that we can apply to specific adaptations that we feel are necessary. If you use the right tools, you can do a lot to adapt what you offer the pupil. So we have a variety of situations, of course, in France, and the fact that the system is characterized by low autonomy doesn't mean that There is no variation within the country between schools and areas of the country. Sometimes this variation is even increased by the level of standardization that we can see across the system. And we can have different answers from different school principals, also depending on their agency, their previous experiences and capabilities. Still, there are important challenges that might be similar and need an answer in different ways. For instance, I was trying to make it very clear that there is a disconnection in Italy, for instance, between teachers' autonomy and principals' decision-making powers and autonomy at the school level. Those two things are pretty disconnected, and it represents a significant aspect that complicates decision-making in a certain country context and school systems. And I can also give a sense of divergences that are relevant in this case between country context. If we look at Teachers' Council and the school boards and the extent of the principal influence, I think it is very interesting, and we can see how they cope with that, how they, for instance, an Italian principal says one needs to persuade and enlarge the circle. Whenever I deem it's necessary to introduce a change, I use, let's say, persuasions in groups, constantly widening the circle. The decision-making process often involves strains in relationship. People have suffered, but alas, there is no other way when you want to change. We are now in the 5th year of a significant change approach. Something have been implemented and some fears have been overcome. A French school principal is also talking about the peculiarity in France is that the head of the school is also the chair of the governing board. And for example, holding meetings whenever I have to, I validate all the decisions of this board, but I can do it anyway. So working with the boards it's very different in these countries. It's not the same thing in Italy and in France. And they have different strategies to cope with that. So it's not that I can identify the same negotiation strategies. However, we can see that they have maybe power around time allocations, especially in France, some power around and task around organizational arrangements and new ways to cope with the organization, and budget-related tasks. For instance, in Italy, certain school principals are able to increase their school budget by consistently applying to the European Union funds or the ministry or the local municipality funds, and really increasing it significantly for 50,000 allocated state money per year to 500,000. So that's a state system that invented a new way to cope with constraints in budget, and also, it's not negotiating also new figures in the school and passing on this message to teachers in the school that we need to engage with raising money in a certain way in order to increase the possibility to work. So something that it's a little bit as identifying strategies. So for instance, parliamentary-like decision-making processes, particularly in Italy. So talks and sometimes endless talks. Limited powers in the time allocation or absence of significant decisions. One principal was mentioning this, that the board meetings are quite short. I keep telling them that they are for deliberating, not for debating. They are for debating as far as you come to a deliberation. Otherwise, I found that many schools, a psycho-collective trauma is created, and then it doesn't come to anything. So we've changed the organization. I made all the meetings very short. This might look as very hierarchical, right? However, it's a way to reach a decision where we have collegial bodies introduced in the 70s that are not aligned with the school autonomy reform which came 30 decades later. And so there are significant contradictions in how the system is shaped and how school leaders can work with the system. So that's one way to cope with the system. This doesn't mean that there are no conversation and influence and corridor conversations and trying to gain people, to influence people, to have them on board. And this doesn't mean that this principle is successful every time. So he's not. The influence of local communities and political representatives on school governance is also complex and varies by countries, and sometimes principals have to work with the local political representatives in order to enhance their budget or to adopt different approaches to schooling, to make curriculum changes. Sometimes school leaders may reduce teachers' margins for maneuver in such systems. So that might be paradoxical, but that's happening. Consultative methodologies dominate interactions, for instance, in Romania, between school leaders and local stakeholders, particularly regarding budget considerations. And system fragmentation engenders informal and imbalanced competition for limited funds, exposing the profession to political challenges and informal opaque transactions. So we have interactive practices within the broader system governance with those outside schools, and finding strategic partners is important to overcome hierarchies, who are anyway very significant across all the 4 countries. And interactive practices within the organization are equally important and informal most of the time to overcome internal barriers. So the interactive leadership assumes at times the form of a purely political transaction in an area that specific professional rules should govern. Formal interaction with decision-making bodies follows the patterns of representativeness and political control. Leadership is often and quite paradoxically both hierarchical and non-interactive. Yet, within these constraints, principals do act strategically, working collaboratively with many other actors within and outside the school. They cultivate consensus, engage in micropolitical negotiations, and rely on persuasion rather than imposition. Such interactive forms of leadership underscore the importance of building trust, leveraging informal channels, and aligning central mandates with school-level priorities. Yes, I think I came to an end of my presentation, and I'm, as I said, not sure that there is a clear takeaway. As I was talking with my friend Rick Mintroff earlier, but just my point is to make it visible, the diversity of the profession, and go deeper. I don't have all the answers, but go deeper and even look across different contexts, so including the English case in a comparative study, why not, and seeing if there are radically qualitatively different tactics, or in the end is the same thing, and what's the difference? How can we conceptualize the difference? Thank you very much.
Un grand merci à toutes les 3 au nom de toute l'Assemblée pour ces présentations malheureusement trop rapides, on en a conscience. On a pris un petit quart d'heure de retard, donc je me tourne vers Romuald, je pense qu'il faut passer directement et enchaîner avec la conférence suivante. Merci encore à toutes les 3.
Okay, merci.
Okay, bonjour, mesdames et messieurs. Good morning, everyone. There's no break. I'm very sorry. But there's a little bit I would like, or I'm asked to tell you, which is about a tendency which we have across the globe in many education systems for sometimes not only a couple of years, but some decades. And this is about how do we improve teaching and learning and education, and how do we improve schools and school systems, and how can we link that to data and data use, and how we are actually a bit strategic in what we are doing. because we do a lot in education, all different actors in teacher education, initial teacher training, continuous professional development. Is this the answer alone? Definitely not. Is it up to the principals, you? I mean, you are multifunctional wonder beings, and yes, of course, it's only up to you. No, it's not. It's up to the teachers. It's up to the educators, to the social workers, to the psychologists in school. And of course, it is not. It is probably very much about how we all work together in a coherent, and I would argue in a responsible and strategic way to secure the qualities which we experience and to improve the qualities which we need, and also to innovate education to a certain degree, as a lot of things happening on the world, geopolitical, in terms of climate, sustainability, and many other aspects. There are a lot of challenges, and the question is how can we turn them into chances for education? And curriculum plays a role. For quite some years or decades in certain countries, curriculum was the answer. Yeah, so if we just improve the curriculum, if we invent new subjects, that will do it. And of course it did not. So it's a bit the question like how we do that and how we create a coherent system which turns challenges into chances which are strategic, I would argue. So we all have responsibilities. I think I like this construct very much, that we are all responsible. And maybe we are not only responsible of our job. Maybe we are also responsible how we work with others and their job, to create interfaces, to create and understand what they are doing, to relate our work to their, and to see how we can be a bit more aim-oriented and resourceful or mindful with resources. Because resources are extremely limited in education. And I just had a trip with a colleague here to this conference, and we invest in military aspects, and we have different priorities now. We can discuss that, but that's how it is, that education needs much more resources, and they are limited in resources, and at the same time we have all the challenges, and we have to turn that into chances. And my answer would be responsible with your colleagues, with all your different actors, and develop a clear perspective of a strategy. I don't find many strategies. Sometimes it's called strategies, but I don't think that they are strategies. Strategies is not such a complex thing. It's about aims and means. But if I work with schools and school leaders, they don't even know what aims and means, what the difference is. They come up with suggestions. We want in our school to improve the collegial the collaboration, and we do hospitation, and we observe each other. And then I think, this is not an aim, right? This is a means. The aim is that our pupils are less bored in teaching, less bored in education. So we want to have cognitive activation, yeah, classroom management, and a relationship, which are the three core purposes. So that would be an aim, yeah. So we can say we want to improve the classroom management, but this is still not the aim, right? This is still the mean for what we actually try to do with pupils' education. And so I would argue in this kind of short presentation that we should really think of what is the core purpose, the aim, and then have an adjustment of all the aims according to the situation or situations we are in, which are different. Schools are not the same. Maybe in France, and definitely not in the countries where I work and do research, national projects, Germany, Austria, and Switzerland. There we see a lot of variation within schools, between schools, and so on. And I would like to talk that we know that because we use data. We have all different kinds of data. We have data we don't use, yeah, which is not used, but we also lack data. At the moment in Germany, and not far away from here, we increase all the data instruments of pupils. Yeah, we measure them every year. And then, it's measured, but it's not put into practice. Measuring does not do education. It could help us to be strategic and to check whether our strategy the aims, if we put means to it, if they really work. Yeah. So I would like to talk about strategy and how we use data about different forms of qualities which we have, of course, in education on instructional level, because that's what happens in school most of the time, but also what happens outside of instruction time. When I have a project with 50 schools, they just stopped teaching. They stopped having instruction time. They do self-organized learning, group activities. They try to break the pattern. They try to be revolutionary in the way they organize schools. New settings, new buildings even, like complete tearing down the walls, stopping the gong, doing completely very different kind of an educatope, and a school which is really promoting and focusing educational purposes. And of course, when we do that, we think of like the staff, human resources. That's our main resource. And we lack teachers, maybe not in France, but definitely in Germany, Austria, and Switzerland. Switzerland and some cantons not, but because we pay them a lot. You're really paid a lot. Yeah, so we really want to become a teacher because you're really doing fine. Yeah. So you can think that this does something with the education environment, but also the organization, the structure, the processes, the equipment, you know, like whether you have nice equipment to do also digital or self-organized learning or all these kind of things. So I think this is like we do things on, let's say, outside layers which should have an impact on education for the sake of the pupils, of all pupils. We just invented in Germany, and it took me like a lot of time, that we spent 20 billion euros additionally for education for the next 10 years for 10% of German schools, and this program is called Startchancen. I was at every meeting at federal level, I was in parliament and everywhere. It's not only me, it's many others. And to invent a project which promotes particular those schools who are in very, let's say, bad situations, maybe doing extremely good in strategy and school development and everything, and in teaching, but they're also, again, within this low SES context, low social economic context, schools which are really at their limit. You know, we follow up 450 schools of them since 10 years, and they say and exactly in this moment, strategy is even more important, because you have high expectations, no resources, even frustration, conflicts, crises, and catastrophes in school, where it is important to think about what are our aims, our specific aims. And I was, because I see Rick standing there, I remember when you visited us and we talked about agile school development, that you think from what is in the context, the real aspects you want, and not superficial aspects, and no blind actionism or folklore, we could say. Well, let's do a bit school development folklore, do a little bit that or that, but do really something senseful in the change of impact towards the individual pupil. And we do that because we do school development. Yeah, we have maybe a bit treasure hunting instead of failure hunting, or we do analysis, data use, and we develop strategies and implement them and so on. And we could do that on personal level with an individual person, a pupil, a teacher, and psychologist. We could do that on group level, on organizational level, on regional level, on system level. So we try to constantly go through cycles of improvement. Right? So that's what we actually do. And in this context, data-based or data-supported strategic development would be you use data, like senseful data, in a way that informs you not only where your weaknesses are or your problems, but what are the possibilities you have. Because some can go step by step and some can do a jump. So you also are informed about what is next practice towards best practice, and you use data after you went through a cycle to check whether that was senseful. This is in our discussion where I'm working, sometimes forgotten that data is not only at the beginning important, but also to acknowledge achievements. yeah, or to see that you spent a lot of time and resources and you had no impact, or even worse. So I think this is very important to keep in mind. We have a data cockpit in our longitudinal mixed method studies comprising all different kinds of factors, even also process variables, which are most often forgotten by data, also on ministry level at the moment, because it's much easier to measure pupil achievement, cognitive, instead of, let's say, holistic, emotional and social and motivational. And you forget the colleagues, the staff. Yeah, how they are, what is their well-being actually, and how do they do, and what are their competencies or their behaviors, and how that creates impact. In this cockpit we see schools, you know, this is like 3 measurement points, so I can, let's see whether this works like that. So this is one school, this is another school, these are mean scores. Mean scores is not the whole reality because you have variations, so sometimes you have the same mean score, but the homogeneity in the perspectives are narrow, and sometimes you have even bipolar perspective. So this is one indicator. This is how the school leaders are rated by their staff on a scale level with various items. So for instance, these colleagues in this school rate their principal very well, yeah? And here not so well. It goes from 1 to 5. Can you understand that? Okay, and now these school leaders get 3 years coaching. Okay, this is not the control group, or this is only those who got coaching. Compared to the control group, they do really well. But coaching does not work for everyone, obviously, because it's an interactive thing. So if you don't want coaching, or if you're not so motivated, or if you don't use it, if you only deal with superficial topics, not the real problems. But it's not only that they got coaching, they also got school consultancy. They got an external advisor for a couple of years. They also got additional funding, money. They got training development programs. And still you see that some, and this is over a period of time, decline. And that's not only in only one indicator, but in some schools in many indicators. So you see, even there's intervention given, it does not work for every school or every group or every individual. It needs some aspects. That you have on high level blue stability, because that's what we want. If you are high, it's sometimes difficult to keep the high quality, as you probably know. And you want, if you have low qualities, to increase them. And not only in one aspect, but in various aspects. And some aspects are highly important. If you make effect sizes and control that with other groups who did not get the interventions, then you see really this intervention in general does good, but not even good for everyone. You can find the button. So anyway, it is leadership which does the trick for the improvement journey, not only because I showed you leadership, but if you show other aspects of the school, even to student achievement, we know that leadership really plays an important role. It was said before by others. Chris mentioned it, and others here mentioned it. And we see that a really important factor for improvement is collaboration. And I would say strategic collaboration. So it is that people work together. This costs actually time. Not everyone likes to collaborate with people who are not really motivated and competent, because that's really anstrengend. What is anstrengend? It costs a lot of energy, tiring. And so it is a collaboration where you have aims and means, sensible and so on. So what I would argue also with our longitudinal model, is also a simplistic model, not like Christopher showed you. We see that leadership also in a shared collaborative arrangements where you enable and create advocacy with others, taking on responsibility for the quality of your school, the teaching and all the different aspects associated to it, supports the collaborative level, which is strategic, helps, for instance, this dependent variable, where it was aimed that we have actually a latent variable on second level because of my inclusive behavior and the group efficacy, group inclusive behavior. So we can see that there are two main factors. There are actually 15, but I showed you only now 2. which really helps. So it's leadership, not only by one person, but by different persons who take on responsibility, actually creating the situation that everyone in an organization takes on responsibility, including the pupils themselves, because they are the learners, they are the co-producers of their education. And I would argue that strategy is a key thing we should talk about. Or at least in my context, we should talk about much more about strategy in terms of high expectations, low resources. Let's do a few things rightly and others maybe not. Because we also have to discuss, can we always add? Now we have future skills, we invent subjects like cooperation and communication or creativity, or let's do, my federal minister in Austria, he invents the subject of AI use. Of course it's good, but it's also integrated in all the other subjects, of course. Yeah, we can always add. Maybe we have to delete a few things in education. Some subjects. Now they discuss we should delete Latin. Yeah, abolish Latin. That creates some discussion. Yeah, but you know, what would it be in your context? Maybe it's not a subject. Maybe it is something my principles, they say immediately bureaucracy. Maybe even providing data for the data portfolio, yeah, the dashboard. So anyway, I would like to think about how we create on one hand coordination, kind of leadership, and on the other hand, this collaborative arrangement, which of course means in a metaphor that everyone pulls in one direction at the same time and not in different directions. So it's also about an alignment of actions or practices in a school. So that means you need to have aims. Maybe it's not possible to have one aim, but if you think of a chain of aims. You have an aim, a core aim, and then you think of means. You have another aim, you think of means, and then you build that and refine that and make it context specific. And maybe it's even wrong that we have school programs. Rick, you know the German context very well, because sometimes a school is so big, a school program is too unspecific for a year group or a subject group. Maybe they need also strategy, a refined strategy for their group. But even if we want to do, and I was promoting very much networked systems, education landscapes, schools working together in school networks, or with other partners, sport associations, music clubs, and so on. Maybe then you also need a strategy there. So maybe we need, for all different kind of perspectives, a strategy. An enterprise like Siemens or others, they don't have one strategy. They have various strategies. They have a communication strategies, human resource strategies. They have for different products a strategy and so on. So maybe we need to be a bit more refined, not bureaucratic. I'm not talking about another papers. Yeah, I'm not talking about another exercises which are rolled out across all in Germany, 40,000 schools or 5,000 schools in Austria or another 5,000 in Switzerland. So if you work together, there are few ingredients which are important. If you work together with someone who is completely incompetent, it will not be very helpful even if he's very motivated. Yeah? If he is very competent but not motivated, it will also not help you. So really, but these are completely dependent. You have to work with that as a leader. Yeah, you have to see, because if I don't think that I'm successful, I'm not really motivated. Yeah, so this is something which is very important in a formal context, but also the legitimacy that they are not only motivated or competent. Or we heard knowledge, and Chris talked about wisdom and knowledge and understanding, but you also need that you are allowed to do it like that. So it is about enabling too and trust. So for me, strategy is to find out in a collaborative arrangement what is possible next towards best. Yeah, so and that can maybe be in one context because of a certain situation, lack of teachers, high frustration, little steps. But it could be in such a crisis a big jump, because this is the moment where the school says, let's get rid of this and this, and let's reinvent our school. Let's be very creative and innovative. So that's what I would call responsible leadership, or responsible and strategic leadership. There are also universities like St. Gallen working with this construct of responsible leadership. And it may be like an umbrella where you put eclectically a lot of things together, and it's not only one thing. So it has also aspects of moral practices and moral leadership, which maybe at the moment with democracy and our situation in the state is also very important, not only geopolitically, but also in Germany. Yeah, we will probably have the first prime minister coming from AfD pretty soon. And that is really something, also for education, which we see also in other countries. But okay, so my question is, how are you? So it's very good if you are fine. Yeah, it's very, very good, because if I had a presentation yesterday to all superintendents of one state, and we asked the principals about the supervisors how they do, and they were actually very good results, and they were so relieved after this presentation because they thought I will make them. So they were very fine. I said, but this is excellent. If you get good results, if you're fine, you can jump higher. Yeah, it's probably even a possibility instead of being kind of stressed. So the question for me would be, how is your bio? If you are fine, what is your bio? And I have postcards for you, unfortunately in German, but maybe you can do them around. I show you in the last part of my presentation, I want to show you a model, and it's called bio. Because I think if you ask like how you are, or how are we in a group, or how we are in a school, we could do bio, or what would you call it in French? Yeah, bio. Bio. Yeah, we can do bio. Oui, c'est une possibilité. So, and that means if we do bio, which I will explain in a minute, we not do only innovation, we will also sustain and keep the things which are good. We are also traditionalists in a way, not only revolutionaries. We can also do piecemeal engineering. Yeah, we can do all the different things, and I would argue that we do all the things at the same time. It is not either or, is as well. So this is the model, which is also on your postcard, unfortunately in German, but I also have it in English, so no worries. I also have it in French. Yeah, it will come, I will show you. Oh, is the French not there? Oh yeah, it is also there, okay. Let me explain it, I say, because this is neglected the last 20 years in most of the literature, we should not do only change management, which is up there, we should also keep what is proven. We should bolster. In German we would say bewahren, bewährtes bewahren. Because we only talk about change and forget to keep the proven. So one aspect is, if I ask you how you are, you brainstorm what is excellent. You say, this is good. And I do that with teachers, with social workers, I do that with schools, with network of schools. You have a topic. It could be, how do we use AI in instruction? And then you do bolster. You think, what all we do? What works? The second question is, what do we do, what we can do better, more effective, or more efficient? That's optimize. That's actually not so difficult, because if you already do, you know how it is, you know it's not so big resistance. But innovation is the tricky part, because some people think, that doesn't work, not with us, that you create resistance and so on. Some people of you not. So that's bio. You understand? Bio. And it's not either or, it's always as well, but you can have different emphasis. So you can say as a person, I want to reinvent myself. You can say as a school, this is the chance now to make a big jump, not a small step. And then you put more of your resources in innovation. But at the same time, you also keep the proven and you also optimize. And you can be in a situation where you won a school prize, as we have in Germany. You worked 7 years like hell, parents work and so on. And then you say, hey, now we need to consolidate. We need to take a breath. We need to do still innovation, but we now focus a bit more that we don't lose what we worked for. Okay? So you can have different emphasis after the brainstorming to choose priorities, but you always choose from all sectors. But you also need to generate resources, because the given ones are far too little. And it's expected we all have passion. Isn't it like that? Also in France? I don't know. Maybe. And that's why we need to suspend. We need to stop We need to think what we don't do. And when I started with this biomodel, let's say 7 years ago and so on, I didn't have the suspend. But I realized I have to invent that. And I used the German word abschaffen. I don't know, you understand abschaffen? And my principle said it's not possible because it's not allowed. I cannot abschaffen, I cannot get rid of, I cannot stop. And in Switzerland we have a very nice word and it's called sistieren. And sistieren means I don't abolish it, I just don't do it for the next couple of weeks or the next couple of months. So it's a timely period where you stop, but then it comes back again, right? So this is so I try now in Germany and also in Austria to spread the word of sistieren, and it really picks up. So it's now the new technical professional term for we get rid of it, but not for all time, but for at the moment, for the current situation. So, and you can do brainstorming. Some of the teachers brainstorm very sensible things what to suspend. One principal says we suspend the Parents' Day at our school, you know, and then all other principals, but my goodness, it's so important to reach out. But he said it does not work. There are no parents coming. There are no teachers motivated for it. We have to get rid of it. But of course, the outreach to parents are important. But we have now mother days or mother courses or like a cafe, mother cafe, and we have this and this. So sometimes you also come from suspend to get new ideas. And in French, I tried my best with the bio. So we had a very long discussion with Romuald and another colleague. Where is he now with the big glasses? He's sitting up there. Can stand up. Thank you very much for you. Because he immediately, I asked him, can we have a word with B which means keep it? And he said, conserver? And I said, no, with B. Yeah. But he also smiled. It was just the first, it's brainstorming. I should not judge him. It was brainstorming. And then I said, okay, conserver, would not so bonserver. Yeah. And then Romuald immediately said, that's not a French word. So let's call it bonserver. So that's when Tim came out and I said, this is a creative act of wisdom generation. Or bien servé, Romuald suggested, or I googled bien gardé, whatever. So we keep that. That's the model. And then the other words are quite similar actually. So not so different. So if you innovate something, at some point you optimize something, and at some point you bolster. It's maybe not the best, but it's enough. So don't always think bolster means excellent. It could mean sufficient. Yeah. But if you optimize and you don't think it's working, why not just get rid of it again? But if you think generally there was an aim, the mean does not work, but the aim was important, then you get again, and it does not. It should be an arrow coming up to innovate. You can then think, okay, let's innovate again, right? There it is. Okay, it was wrongly programmed. Sorry. So bolster and optimize is extremely simple. Yeah, the tricky part is that. And I have a network in Rheinland-Pfalz, which is also not far away. The Schools of the Future is called Schulen der Zukunft, a big project with the ministry. And they said, what can I innovate? Yeah, and then you need think tanks, you need brainstorming, you need the knowledge base, you need people who have ideas, you get inspired, podcasts or whatever. There's so many ways, not only university lecturers, of course, most of them are extremely boring, but you need some inspiration. And it could be from the practice to the practice, it could be from academia, it should be something where we know it has impact. Because of course you can also pilot things. Rick would say, if you start something new, why don't you do it with everyone? Start a pilot. Start working with a group, a year group, and then evaluate and then large work a bit more agile. Yeah, and I would think this is great. Yeah, but at the same time you can say, hey, this is working in your school, like how you sit together, and then I use something like that. I adapt it to my school context. So for suspend, teachers don't need ideas. They have a lot of things they want to get rid of. For principals, it's more tricky. But I would say, if you do brainstorming, think about, don't suspend something which is educational important. Yeah, because this is the tricky part. Okay, if you brainstorm, at some point you have to set priorities. What is really important, what is less important, or you think of this is easy to get, this is less easy to get. So you can start with different criteria to set priorities and put them more in the center. Yeah, and if you do that in a collegial way, you can think, we agree very easily, we put that in the center. That's not the way it should be. It should be what is important for pupils, not where you agree on, because sometimes you have the minimal agreement thing. So let's not vote for this, but discuss about that. So it takes a little bit time. Or brainstorm, put up a paper like that, and of course I don't like this paper, I would like to do it like that, yeah? You see, because you need a suspend, which is on the back card of your postcard, yeah? So then you can say, bon servir is excellent or sufficient. Optimize is more effective or more efficient. You understand? More efficient is you reduce the energy you put in the effect. Why not be a bit more smart and more economically? Why don't we invest in efficiencies much more than in trying effectiveness? Yeah? Okay, so this is clear. If you do it not for a person, but for a group or an organization, new might not be new to everyone. So if you say how to use AI in test formats, there might be 3 teachers who already do that and many not. But still, it is not a common practice at the school. That's why it is innovation. But of course, it's good to know a few are doing it, because you can use them for micro professional development and so on, and use them as very important internal facilitators and trainers. So this I want to jump. It's very much with this brainstorming after you generate topics to think about, if you prioritize, how they are linked. Can you find like a coherent topic where you say it is instruction, it is human resources, it is organizational, it is the environment of the school, and how these links are set together to reach the individual pupil. And then maybe, and that's what we see in these schools, which we follow up, and the schools we support, that they get a bit more aim and resource oriented, and not do here something and there something and there something. You still have a teacher doing that something and there something, but you get it more aligned and more together, and also more supportive and also more impactful. And these are the steps which are on your postcard. So I would always start with a brainstorming. I would decide about the motors. I would set priorities. And then I would think about the aims and the means, and then about the chain of impact. And then I would write down these aspects in a school program or a strategy and so on. It could be a very simple Excel file, because actually every in school wants to read as little as possible. So you need minimum text, but as much that people understand. But then you can work with hyperlinks that people find the concept or who's involved and so on, so that might be helpful. Yeah, that was the biomodel, and I'm finished with my time. And I still have some time. What should I talk about now? Okay, so maybe a final summary. I think strategy is important, and that's why I try to highlight this aspect. You can highlight so many aspects, of course, but I wanted to highlight this aspect because we have this situation where we have too little resources. Then it's important to set priorities, to focus on the things which are sensible and important to you and your colleagues, why you also entered the profession. And it is about the pupils, about the next generation, about the challenges, to put them into chances. And it is also to avoid circle of declines, dynamics which we see where things go wrong and more things go wrong, and then people leave because some things went wrong, and then it goes more wrong and so on. But it is about to either be preventive or then to have a turnaround. And it is very much about next practices. Our responsibility is to see what can happen using little resources but high impact in my context, knowing about the other contexts. Together is much easier than alone. And that's not a sentence from me, but I found it, and many know it maybe, this sentence. Actually, but if you Google it, you find different persons associated with this slogan. I like this slogan. Do the right things rightly. And because you are responsible, it is a very difficult sentence. Because we always see, hey, here's something too, and here's something too, and here's something too. And then you have things in your suspend or sistieren, and then you still do that. But you're not, because you're also professional. Okay, thank you very much for listening to me.